Hello, it's Alex and welcome to Hey Little Thrifter. Today I'm going to be talking about all of the books I read in February. February was Women in Horror Month and I co-hosted a readathon with the ladies of horror fiction to celebrate and promote female horror authors. I will leave Ladies of Horror Fiction linked below in case you're not already following them. And we had 5 prompts for the readathon, so I ended up picking one book for each prompt. I also had time later in the month to fit in another couple of books outside of the readathon prompts, and I decided to stick with the theme though and choose a couple more female authors. So the first prompt for the Ladies of Horror Fiction readathon was to read a book by an LGBTQIA+ author, and I chose The Barrow Will Send What It May by Margaret Killjoy. This is book 2 in the Danielle Kane series. The first book in the series is The Lamb Will Slaughter the Lion, and I had read that previously and thoroughly enjoyed it, which is why I then wanted to pick up book 2. With it being a sequel, I won't say too much about it, but it's about a character called Danielle who is a traveller. She basically lives life on the road, and she ends up meeting up with this group of people who have taken over an abandoned town and are kind of squatting there, and she becomes involved with them and this situation that they are currently involved in with a spirit demon. And so yeah, she becomes a part of their group and the story kind of follows their adventures. It's a great mix of fantasy and science fiction and horror and speculative fiction, and it does a really great job of blending those genres. I really enjoy her writing style and all of the characters. It all feels very believable. Also, the cast is really diverse. There's a lot of really great representation for different genders and also mental health. So I think all of that is really well done and really enjoyable to read. So yeah, this was an excellent one and a great one to kick off the month with, and I rated it 4 stars. Prompt number 2 was to read a book by a woman of colour author, and for this I chose Shutter by Courtney Alameda. This is a YA novel about a girl who has the ability to see ghosts and auras, and she's part of this team of people who basically track these ghosts down and capture them. And the way that she's able to capture them is through taking a photograph of them on a special camera. So yeah, a really interesting concept, similar to the really awesome video game Fatal Frame / Project Zero. And yeah, that was honestly one of the reasons I wanted to pick it up. And I was doing a buddy read of this with my friend Emily over at Page Turns, and sadly I ended up DNFing Shutter. I realised quite early on that it just wasn't for me. With it involving ghosts, I went into it expecting something atmospheric and spooky, and I thought that maybe the story would involve some kind of mystery, but it's not that at all. It's very action-packed rather than atmospheric. And not that it was a bad book at all or that it was badly written, definitely not. There's definitely an audience for this and I'm sure a lot of people would really enjoy it. It just wasn't really my cup of tea. So I decided to put this one down and move on to something else. Prompt number 3 was to read a book that has been on your TBR forever, and I chose The Ghost Stories of Edith Wharton. This is a collection of stories, all originally from early 20th century, so kind of 1900 through 1930s kind of era, and I don't know why I'd been so hesitant to pick this up, but I'm really glad I finally did because it was a really great collection. I really enjoyed her writing style and there were definitely some really spooky stories in here. I thought all of the stories were good, if not great, and a couple of my favourites were one called Afterward, which was somewhat predictable as the further I got to the end, but I think that's more, you know, we've seen so many twists and turns in books and films in this day and age, but I think it would have been really ahead of its time when it was actually written. and it was just a really well constructed story and thoroughly enjoyable. Another of my favourites was called Bewitched, and it was kind of almost a folk horror tale involving some witchy / ghostly goings on. It was really good. And another one called Pomegranate Seeds, which was about a woman whose husband is receiving these letters that are delivered directly to their home, and she doesn't know who they're from, but she wants to find out. I will say a few of the stories were really well written, you know, really great story that got you kind of captivated and were really atmospheric, but then the last page or the final paragraph was just kind of left me feeling, what just happened exactly? And I would have to like read back, and I still was none the wiser. So admittedly, a few stories kind of lost it right at the end, but the story for the rest of it was really enjoyable, so I guess that's still cool. But yeah, this was a great read. I rated it 4 stars overall. It's definitely one I would recommend if you're looking for some classic ghost stories. Prompt number 4 was to read a book with a great cover, and personally I don't think it gets much better than the cover of Rebekka Moon by Michele Spence, and I'm very pleased to report that the book totally lived up to the amazing cover. It was such a good read. It's about this teenage girl called Rebekka Moon who has the power to hypnotise and influence people, and she has plans for the people of this small town who have clearly underestimated her all of these years. But things change when a psychiatrist moves into town and starts to cotton on that there's some strange things going on and that Rebekka might be at the heart of it. I do have a separate review video for this, so if you want to hear more of my thoughts, I'll leave that linked in the description below. But yeah, this was an excellent read. I thoroughly enjoyed it and I rated it 4 stars. And the 5th and final prompt was to read a young adult or middle grade book, and I went with The Stranger by Caroline B. Cooney. This is about a teenage girl called Nicoletta who meets this mysterious boy at school called Jethro. So yeah, right off the bat we have a couple of pretty unique names, but as she starts to fall for Jethro, she finds out that he's really not like all the other boys at school. And yeah, I won't say too much more than that, but this was pretty good. I really enjoyed the setup. As the story went on, it did get a bit into kind of fairy tale territory, which isn't really my thing, unfortunately, but it was still a pretty good read, and I do really enjoy her writing style, so I rated this one 3 stars. So after the books for the readathon, I picked up 2 more books. First up was Be Mine by Jane McFann. I had intended on picking this up in February for Valentine's Day, and yeah, it wasn't until later in the month until I actually got a chance to pick it up, but I'm glad I did, but unfortunately it wasn't great. It's about a teenage girl called Bethany. She starts to receive these kind of hearts and notes and flowers and stuff from a secret admirer, but turns out, yeah, it's not a good thing. To say what I didn't like about this book will get into spoiler territory, so if you'd rather not hear what happens, then you can skip ahead to when I'm holding the book up again. But basically there isn't very much suspense here. Usually in these kind of books, if there's something creepy going on, there are usually a few suspects, and then that makes the story suspenseful and you're trying to figure out who the culprit is. But in this book there weren't really any suspects, so it wasn't very suspenseful. It didn't really have you thinking about who it might be, and it was still quite an enjoyable read for like the first 3/4 of the book, even though it wasn't necessarily the type of story I went in expecting. It was still well written and quite enjoyable, but the final quarter or so, when it's finally revealed who this secret admirer is, A, it was a character we hadn't been introduced to before, so it came completely out of nowhere. And also this character's reasons for doing what he was doing were just really stupid. So unfortunately it kind of ended on a low point. And unfortunately that let the whole book down, so I ended up rating this one 2 stars. And the last book I read in February was Mama by Ruby Jean Jensen. This is being reissued on March 1st, so you can go out and get your hands on a copy. And I really enjoyed this one. I am going to do a separate review video for it soon, so I won't talk a ton about it here, but it's about a family who move into an old family home due to their life circumstances, and the youngest child of the family finds a bunch of dolls and toys up in the attic, and yeah, creepiness ensues. I really enjoyed this one and I rated it 4 stars, and yeah, I'll be talking a bit more about it in a future video. So those were all of the books I read in February. Let me know if you've read any of these. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you took part in the Ladies of Horror Fiction readathon, thank you so much, and I would love to hear how you got on, what books you read, if you have any new favourites. For Women in Horror Month, I also watched a bunch of horror films directed by women, and I'm going to do a separate review video on those, so keep an eye out for that soon. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you again in my next video. Bye!